The Vikings had their first real bad injury day of camp. There's some shakeups on the offensive line, and Christian Darrisaw is kind of cooking. Let's talk about it all on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. And today on the show, we have a lot to catch up on. A very eventful last couple of days in Vikings training camp. A lot of injuries, which isn't fun, but thankfully none of the injuries seem to be all that serious. They are all finger injuries, which is a very strange stroke of luck. You might be tempted to find some meaning in that pattern. I don't think you find it. I think this is just weird luck. I think it's just weird the gods are laughing at the Vikings. And I mean, what else is new? Also today on the show, we're going to talk a lot of offensive line, talk about Chris Reed and what's up with him. And apparently Christian Darrisaw is having a crazy good camp. And also kind of what to watch for moving forward if you're interested in those offensive line battles. So injury news first. There have been 3 injuries, all of them sustained in the last couple days of training camp. The first one was Irv Smith, and it happened on Monday. On Monday's practice, Irv Smith, one of the first times he put on full pads since his meniscus injury, made it through about half of that practice before walking off, and then came back on the field later. On Tuesday morning, Kevin O'Connell came out to the podium to talk to reporters. It was Wes Phillips's day to talk, so this wasn't even a scheduled thing. This is just O'Connell coming out to update people, which is a pretty homey move. He does not have to do that. And he says Irv Smith had surgery on his thumb, and they expect him back for the opener. So that's the report is Irv Smith expected back to the opener, fantasy draft accordingly. But here's the deal. He's had surgery to repair an injury to his thumb. My guess is if they say we expect him back for the opener, that's probably a torn ligament in his thumb, not unlike the one Drew Brees dealt with a couple years ago, that year where Teddy Bridgewater started a bunch of games for the Saints. That took Drew Brees 5 weeks to get back from, and he admitted he wasn't fully 100%, and he probably pushed it. 5 weeks from now is the opener. So I think the Vikings might be a little bit aggressive there in saying that they expect him back for the opener. But of course, all things are different, and they have a whole medical team saying that. But that is an aggressive estimate. It might be appropriate to do an aggressive estimate because they know stuff that I don't about it, but it is aggressive nonetheless. That if that is a 5-week timetable based on other precedent, it's a common quarterback injury. We've seen a few quarterbacks deal with that, and quarterback wear and tear on the thumb is a little bit different. So the rehab might be different for catching the ball versus throwing the ball. And Wes Phillips also said later in his press conference that Irv Smith will still kind of do everything. His lower half works is what he said, so he'll run around, he'll do everything. He'll still be in all the walkthroughs. He just can't catch the ball. So don't throw him the ball, until his thumb is better. But he'll still run all the routes and all the concepts and stuff. So I don't anticipate that he falls behind on the offensive install or anything like that. You're not going to get you're not going to find him working on the rehab field or anything like that. And they might even see him be a limited participant in practice for a while with just a big old club on his hand or something like that. But if they want him to be 100% and they don't want to make him push it with that thumb, they might think about shutting him down for the first week or 2 of the season, but that's about as bad as it gets with a thumb injury like this. So worst case scenario, this is the kind of thing that keeps him out for a few weeks at the beginning of the season, but this is not a season ending kind of injury, unless there's some kind of other setback or some kind of other injury happens. That's where we're at with Irv Smith. Second thing that happened was on Tuesday's practice, Dalvin Cook left practice with somebody holding his wrist, and for a second, that sounded shouldery, which is really scary with Dalvin Cook because he's got shoulder stuff. Not a shoulder thing. He's got a big old wrap on his ring finger, on his left ring finger. So that's his non-dominant hand. That is definitely the kind of thing you can play through if it were a playoff game or something. I wouldn't expect anybody to play through the pain like that, but Dalvin Cook's a real tough guy, so I don't anticipate him missing any meaningful snaps, and it's not like he was going to play preseason anyways. So that one doesn't worry me very much at all. Like, heal that up. Dalvin Cook does not need that much training camp to like get his legs a going, and he's basically making the same reads as he was before. So I would fully anticipate Dalvin Cook shutting down for the rest of the offseason program, and I think that's a very good idea. And just save that dude for week 1, and he'll be fine for week 1. And then I don't know the severity of the injury that Alexander Mattison is dealing with, but he also left with a finger injury. I want to say his pinky, but I don't know the severity of it or the situation with it. But what that means is that I don't know if Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison will play preseason. Like, they didn't play preseason at all last year. They might have played in the Chiefs game, the final game. That was kind of the dress rehearsal game. But either way, like, very little. So you're not missing out on either of these guys. They're not playing in the preseason. So long as they're ready by week 1, you're not missing anything. But what it means is that we now know we get to see. Oh, and Kenny Wangu is day-to-day, by the way. So, like, the running back group is, like, down to its depth. Most of the reps now are Ty Chandler and Bryant Kobach. And now we get a good look at Ty Chandler. So that's really, that'll work. We'll go for that, right? At the other position, tight end, it looked like Johnny Munt got most of the first-team reps. Zach Davidson got some yesterday. He did not continue to get first-team reps. I said yesterday that was a thing that we were really talking about, or that we were really looking for. Does he get more first-team reps? Answer is no. Bummer. But it's been Johnny Munt, and he probably is tight end 1 if Irv Smith can't be ready by week 1. Wouldn't be surprised to see some kind of free agent come in. This is the kind of time where you pull some random guy off the street, if only just to play for, 2-ish weeks. If you need him, or just to be a competition for tight end 2, especially if, I don't know, I haven't heard a peep out of Nick Muse from training camp. Or if Johnny Munt and Zach Davidson aren't doing it for you, you could maybe go the Irv Smith route. But something else that happened in Tuesday's practice was a bunch of veteran rest days. And this is another thing Kevin O'Connell said outright. This is not speculation. So he said Jesse Davis, Harrison Smith, and Patrick Peterson all sat out of Tuesday's practice as a pre-planned load management rest day thing, veteran rest. And what a coincidence. Shout out to Sam in the Discord for pointing this out to me in the first place. But he said, what a coincidence. All those guys have rookies backing them up that now get a whole bunch of extra reps. Interesting how that goes. So Andrew Booth and Lewis Seen and Ed Ingram all got days with the ones. Seems like that all went okay. I didn't hear too much of a catastrophe from any of those guys. I think I saw Seen got beat on one play just like barely, and Booth might have made a miscommunication. I didn't see much from Ed Ingram, but they didn't wear the pads, so you wouldn't hear much out of an O-line, D-line matchup or anything like that. But that kind of brings me to the offensive line, and there's a couple of storylines going on with the offensive line that we really should go over. But before I get into that, I want to talk to you about a sponsor I'm really, really excited to have on Locked On Vikings. It's BetterHelp. Therapy rules, y'all. Big time therapy fan. Therapy number 1 guy here. I started going to therapy a few years ago, and the thing about it for me was it took me a while to find the right guy, the right therapist. And I went through a lot of consults, and I went through a lot of people's, I don't really like your outlook. I don't really like your outlook. And you weren't that helpful. And you weren't that helpful. And then I found a person who was perfect for me, who had specializations in all of the things that I needed help with, has ADHD alongside me, so a lot of understanding there. And the dude was a sports journalist in a past life, so he even has understanding of like the idea of being like this close to a sports team and stuff. And it was just a perfect match, but it takes some time. So to help you with that, that is where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp is an online therapy service. It's not like a crisis line or anything like that. It's just therapy from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to go into an office or deal with any of that. And you can change therapists freely if you want. You can try out a whole bunch of people, and I super, super recommend that you do. And I am of the mind that even if you're the happiest person in the world, therapy can be an avenue for you to find a better version of yourself, and I think everyone should be interested in that. So many people have been using BetterHelp that they are recruiting additional therapists in all 50 states, and they have a special offer for Locked On Vikings listeners. Get 10% off of your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off of your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. And for your second listen, why don't you go check out the Minnesota football party and listen to Arif Hassan hurl insults at me after I show up late because I slept in the day we were recording. If you remember the old zone coverage football machine with Sam Ekstrom and Luke Inman and Arif Hassan, it's those three people plus me. It's a great time. I listened to that show when it was on, and now I get to kind of be on this new version of it. Very cool stuff. Go check that out. And also check out the history documentary. It's at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I would love it if you join me on Patreon. But either way, you can find episode 1 and you can find episode 2 coming out on Saturday or Friday. If you've joined, you can get it a day early. Now I want to switch gears now and talk about Chris Reed. So one of the recurring themes of all of the offseason has been Chris Reed. What's going to happen with that guy? And it seems pretty clear now. He has now taken snaps, I believe, at all 3 interior positions. So he has got that swing backup role. Jesse Davis looks like he's in the driver's seat for starting right guard, although Ed Ingram gets a chance every time Jesse Davis gets a rest day, and Jesse Davis has a brace on his knee, so I have a feeling there's going to be a few of those, and Ed Ingram is now getting the first team reps. Before the last time Jesse Davis got a rest day, it was Chris Reed getting the first team reps, and Ed Ingram got 2 of them, and now Ed Ingram got the whole day. So that's forward momentum, or it could be a rotation. We kind of have to wait to the next rest day to see. Chris Reed has taken second team right guard reps, second team left guard reps, and a lot of second team center reps. Now, the thing about Chris Reed is he has never played center in a meaningful game. It's only ever been camp and preseason. So he's not a bona fide backup center, but he's competing for that job with Austin Schlottman, who is a bona fide backup center. For my money, I think Chris Reed's a better lineman in general than Austin Schlottman, but he's not a center. So that is a really interesting competition. There's some speculation that Chris Reed would be competition for Garrett Bradbury. We're not there yet. I don't think, at least as far as I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who's listening who was there, but Chris Reed hasn't taken any first team reps yet. That would be the signal to me that there's a true competition here. But it was more the speculative, if Garrett Bradbury keeps struggling, apparently Harrison Phillips has been kicking the crap out of him, bowling him over and stuff, which is, that's going to fully highlight the worst part of Garrett Bradbury, so sure. But if that keeps happening, then there could be some competition. Now, all offseason, I wanted there to be a center competition. I wanted somebody, bring me a mid-round draft pick, bring me somebody. It could have been Chris Reed. So I would actually be pretty for that. Make Garrett Bradbury earn his job. He's in the last year of his deal. He's has not been the kind of first round pick you want to sign to a second contract, right? He's not getting extended this offseason, so he's fighting for his job. There's not much in between for that, I don't think. So sure, that's all fine, but it doesn't sound like it's happening yet. Until Chris Reed gets a first team rep, it's more wishful thinking. And Chris Reed as an option for center is not that exciting for me. Love the idea of competition, make him beat somebody to keep his job, but I don't actually like the idea of Chris Reed at center more than I like the idea of Garrett Bradbury at center, mostly because he hasn't taken a meaningful, he hasn't had to set a protection against an exotic blitz, against a front that a team was willing to save for the regular season. He's played some center in the preseason, and that gives you a little bit of experience there. But when you're going up, preseason defenses are famously vanilla. So you're going up against very vanilla fronts. And one of the things that centers have to do that we don't pay a lot of attention to, because I think a lot of people have constructed their entire Garrett Bradbury take out of 2 PFF grades in pass blocking only. But one of the things centers have to do is set the protection, is decide who is blocking who, make that call. And Bradbury does that for the Vikings. Kirk Cousins has veto power, but he doesn't want to use any mental bandwidth on the front. He leaves that to the center so he can focus on the secondary, and that is a correct call. That he should be doing that, and he should be able to trust that he's doing that. And if you have somebody who's never called a protection in a live NFL game, That's a huge liability because when you're in the preseason calling protections, you're seeing the vanilla fronts. That means you're seeing stuff that you've seen all over the place, really basic kind of level one ideas. And you can set the protections against those, but then suddenly you get into a real game and people are starting to threaten gaps and they're starting to be a little bit more shifty. They're starting to move around a little bit more and they're starting to play some of the cards that they held real close to the vest in the preseason. That's a lot harder to call those protections. And the fact that Chris Reed has never done that before would make me really nervous if he ended up winning that center job. He's not even in a competition for it yet. It seems like he's more so, like he's rotating with Austin Schlottman. That's the competition. Backup center is a competition. And I think it's kind of a fascinating one. You've got the guy who hasn't played center versus the guy who has but isn't as good of a player. I think right now we are still in a world where Garrett Bradbury has an uncontested shot, like an uncontested run at the starting center job. And I think if he didn't, the Vikings would have behaved a lot differently in the offseason. Like they didn't draft any centers. The closest thing to a center they got was Austin Schlottman, who has been like cut before. Like he's not like a roster guaranteed player. That was kind of all they did. Like they did not get bona fide competition for Garrett Bradbury in the offseason. So I think kind of trying to talk yourself into a guy taking second team center reps and now he's the center competition is wishful thinking until we see otherwise. And I think if we do see a Garrett Bradbury, Chris Reed competition, I think it would have to take a very, very good Chris Reed preseason game. I don't think we see this in camp. I don't think there's enough. There's too much status quo to upend. I think for Chris Reed to take this job over just by playing really well against the twos, he needs to go in a preseason game and ball, and then suddenly you like prove like, wow, maybe Chris Reed should start. It needs to be this is a Nick Easton, Alex Boone situation more than it is, Jesse Davis versus Ed Ingram situation where there's some status quo for Ingram to upend because he's a rookie, but you're not married to it. The Vikings seem pretty married to Garrett Bradbury by not only their comments, which you can only put so much stock into, but by their actions, which you can put a lot more stock into. Whether you like it or not, I've been delivering that bad news to you all offseason. If this is a surprise to you, that's on you. But if Chris Reed is going to win that job, it will probably require preseason action. So I don't think we see that for a long time. If we see it at all, or he ends up getting the job because Bradbury gets benched in week 14 or something like that. That's going to be the kind of thing we're talking about here. Elsewhere on the offensive line, apparently Christian Darrisaw is balling. Let's take a minute and check in on the second year player. But first, let me chit chat with you about Grambling. If you believe in this Vikings offense, maybe you believe in Christian Darrisaw, you believe in where the offensive line is headed, you believe in Kirk Cousins, who is still absolutely cooking in camp right now. Which, a quick note about that. So I titled the episode yesterday, like Kirk Cousins is dealing, and a bunch of people responded to that by saying like, well, yeah, it's training camp, or yeah, the defense is bad or whatever. Kirk Cousins was bad in camp last year. Like when he came back from COVID, he was like downright awful. Like it was like a concern. And like there is a difference between Kirk Cousins last year in camp and Kirk Cousins this year in camp. He's cooking, and I think in a meaningful sense. Anyways, if you believe in that, go Gramble on the Vikings. They're over under just 8.5 wins. You can bet on if they think they'll win the division, steal it from the Packers, or maybe you can just bet on them getting second in the division. I'm pretty sure it's more than 2-1 odds for that just because you're picking the exact spot, and that's always a little more difficult. Whatever you want to Gramble on, you can find that at betonline.net. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling, all sorts of odds there. You can bet on that. You can bet on Justin Jefferson's over-under. You can bet on WNBA or MLB or tennis or an MMA fight or anything. That is betonline.net, where the game starts. In a Twitter thread from Albert Breer, who does he does this every camp, 5 things from X's camp. He flies around to all the camps and kind of does it's like, I think his Monday morning quarterback thing, very Peter King move. So his 5 things, he did the Vikings. And in his 5 things, the big one that stuck out to me was that the Vikings have a ton of buzz over Christian Darrisaw and how apparently he showed up to camp in insane shape. He has an insane grasp of the playbook, and people are starting to throw Trent Williams comparisons around, which is jarring. It's shocking. I mean, Christian Darrisaw had like an okay rookie season. My take on Christian Darrisaw's rookie season was that it was good for a rookie, but if he didn't improve beyond that, he probably wouldn't get a second contract. It sounds like that's not going to be an issue if the Trent Williams people are to be believed. There is a lot of positive buzz coming out of the Vikings just in general. I think we're in a bit of a new coach honeymoon phase, so there's always going to be hype. You might have noticed there's a lot of optimism coming out of this show this last week, which, hell yeah, it's training camp. What am I going to do? Be a hater in training camp? That would be such a cop move, and I am no cop. But But Albert Breer insists that there is this feeling around Christian Darrisaw that it's shades of Trent Williams, right? Like they're not saying he's actually, that there's going to be a ways to go before you're that good. Trent Williams is insane, but they see it in his build, they see it in his movement, and that would be an utterly insane thing to have just two stalwart tackles. Having those two stalwart tackles, by the way, also helps your interior so much because your interior can just wall up with each other, and it's so much harder to bull rush through somebody like Garrett Bradbury when you just never, ever, ever have to give help to the outside. That can be so helpful. So we should really be rooting for Breer to be right on that one. Let me give you the other notes from this though, because there does seem to be this vibe of like, wow, this coaching transition's going so smooth. That comes out of this piece from Breer's like impression was, this very like harmonious vibe at training camp. And that was what he called like the overriding feeling that he had, that it's this, they've smoothly transitioned like they wanted to. We'll get on the field and actually find out if that bears out, but that's the vibe that he's getting. A couple of the other things were Kendricks and Hicks and Jordan Hicks. And by the way, Jordan Hicks has only practiced a couple times because he had an illness for the first couple days. So he's sort of still just getting there, but even still that Kendricks and Hicks are really helping to be, he called it the nerve center of the unit and communicative and being like leadership on the field and stuff like that, very much taken on the green dot. And that's really encouraging because there are complexities to that Vic Fangio defense that I was a little worried might take some time to really set in and gel. And they might, as we get to full on game speed, but it's nice to see that that's a point of praise at this point. KJ Osborne, he noticed KJ Osborne. Everybody has noticed KJ Osborne. KJ Osborne's been incredible. He's had another really, really, really good camp. He had a great camp last year and it turned out great. I think people are sleeping on KJ Osborne a little bit. They're seeing him as like this sort of just a guy, wide receiver 3, and I think he will be able to transcend that this year. I think there's wide receiver 2 in him this year, especially if Adam Thielen can't stay healthy or something. I think there's wide receiver 2 potential in KJ Osborne, and a big part of that comes from that he's repeating what he did last year in camp. Like he's doing it again, and it's like, okay, this is real. And also he expressed a similar sentiment about Cam Bynum, who's, I would say, has had some ups and downs, but has played pretty well so far. And he's been, beat by some insane catches and stuff. But he's had some ups and downs, but Albert Breer got a good vibe from him. And then he just said, like, hey, watch that cornerback competition, which, yeah, for sure, Cam Dantzler and Andrew Booth, especially as the two of them played next to each other this time because Patrick Peterson got a rest day. You got a real, side-by-side comparison, and it should be an interesting competition. Tomorrow, I'm very excited about tomorrow. I have a really special guest coming on. We're going to talk some X's and O's. It's going to be kind of like that scheme episode we did earlier in the week, the Monday episode where we talked about the offense. I'm going to go into some deeper stuff with somebody who knows a lot more about it than me, and I'm really excited to do that. I think we're all going to learn a whole bunch from it, so make sure you tune in for that. Make sure you check out the history documentary, and the Minnesota football party is a great time. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.